Marcus Williams stood at the free throw line, his hands trembling slightly as 20,000 people filled the arena with deafening noise. The scoreboard showed his team trailing by 1 point, with 3 seconds left in the championship game. This was his moment, the shot that could win everything or lose it all. The ball felt heavy in his sweaty palms. He had practiced this exact scenario thousands of times in empty gyms, on playground courts, and in his backyard. But nothing could have prepared him for this pressure. The crowd's energy was electric, split between those cheering for him and those hoping he would fail. As he bent his knees and prepared to shoot, memories flooded his mind. He remembered being a skinny 12-year-old kid in Chicago, getting picked last for every pickup game. The older kids would laugh when he missed shots, calling him names and telling him he would never be good enough. Back then, basketball felt more like torture than joy. His father had abandoned the family when Marcus was 10, leaving his mother to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Basketball became his escape, his way of dealing with the anger and sadness that lived inside his chest like a constant ache. But even his escape seemed to mock him with every missed shot and every laugh from the other kids. The referee handed him the ball for his first free throw. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to block out the noise and focus on the rim. He thought about all the coaches who had cut him from teams, all the scouts who had overlooked him, all the people who said he was too small, too weak, too inconsistent to ever make it at the highest level. But there was one voice that cut through all the doubt and negativity. It belonged to an old man who used to sit on a bench outside the community center, where Marcus practiced every day. The man was always there, rain or shine, watching kids play basketball with a quiet intensity that made Marcus curious. One day, after Marcus had missed 15 straight shots and was about to give up, the old man called him over. His voice was gentle but firm, carrying an authority that made Marcus stop in his tracks. The man introduced himself simply as Coach Thompson, though he never mentioned coaching anyone or anywhere. Coach Thompson asked Marcus to show him his shooting form. Without saying much, he made small adjustments to Marcus's hand placement, his follow-through, and his balance. Then he told Marcus something that would change his life forever. "Son, the difference between a good shooter and a great shooter isn't talent. It's the willingness to fail 1,000 times to succeed once." Now, standing at the free throw line with everything on the line, Marcus remembered those words. He released the first shot with perfect form, watching as it swished through the net without touching the rim. The arena erupted in a mixture of cheers and boos, but Marcus remained focused. 1 shot down, 1 to go. The championship was within reach, but he knew that missing this second shot would haunt him forever. As he prepared for the final attempt, Marcus smiled slightly, thinking about how far he had come from that scared 12-year-old who used to get laughed at by everyone. The second free throw left Marcus's hands with the same perfect arc as the first. As the ball sailed through the air, time seemed to slow down. The crowd held its breath, 20,000 people frozen in anticipation. When the ball dropped cleanly through the net, the arena exploded in celebration. Marcus's teammates rushed onto the court, lifting him onto their shoulders as confetti rained down from the ceiling. He had done it. Against all odds, the kid who was once laughed at had just won the state championship with 2 clutch free throws. But even in his moment of triumph, his thoughts drifted back to the old man who had changed everything. After that first meeting outside the community center, Coach Thompson had become a constant presence in Marcus's life. Every day after school, Marcus would find him sitting on that same bench, waiting with a weathered basketball and a quiet smile. The old man never asked for anything in return, never mentioned payment or recognition. He simply showed up day after day, helping Marcus become better. The lessons went far beyond basketball techniques. Coach Thompson taught Marcus about discipline, about showing up even when you didn't feel like it, about respecting your opponents and teammates equally. He taught him that missing a shot wasn't a failure if you learned something from it. Most importantly, he taught Marcus that success wasn't about proving others wrong, but about proving yourself right. Under Coach Thompson's guidance, Marcus's game transformed completely. His shooting percentage improved dramatically, but more than that, his confidence grew. He started making his high school team, then becoming a starter, then earning a college scholarship. Through every milestone, Coach Thompson was there, offering quiet encouragement and gentle corrections. But the old man remained a mystery. He never talked about his own basketball background, never mentioned playing or coaching at any official level. When Marcus asked about his past, Coach Thompson would simply smile and change the subject. He seemed to know everything about the game, from the smallest technical details to the deepest psychological aspects, yet he claimed no credentials or achievements. Other kids in the neighborhood started noticing Marcus's improvement and began asking Coach Thompson for help too. Soon the old man was working with a small group of young players, all of them getting better under his guidance. Word spread quietly through the basketball community about this mysterious coach who could turn struggling players into stars. Years passed, and Marcus continued rising through the ranks. He became a college standout, then got drafted into the professional league. Through it all, Coach Thompson remained his most trusted advisor, though he never asked for anything in return. He refused money, declined public recognition, and avoided all attempts by Marcus to repay his kindness. The night after winning the championship, Marcus drove straight to the community center, hoping to find his mentor on their old bench, but Coach Thompson wasn't there. Marcus waited for hours, but the old man never showed up. Worried, Marcus asked around the neighborhood, but nobody seemed to know where Coach Thompson lived or how to reach him. Days turned into weeks, and still no sign of the mysterious coach. Marcus felt lost without his guidance, especially as he prepared for the professional draft. He had so many questions, so much gratitude to express, but Coach Thompson had seemingly vanished into thin air just when Marcus needed him most. Marcus was selected in the first round of the professional draft, fulfilling a dream that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. As he walked across the stage to shake hands with the commissioner, he scanned the crowd, still hoping to spot Coach Thompson's familiar face. The old man was nowhere to be found, leaving an empty feeling in Marcus's chest despite his incredible achievement. His rookie season was challenging but successful. Marcus adapted quickly to the professional level, his fundamentals so solid that veteran players often commented on his technique. Coaches praised his work ethic and basketball intelligence, qualities that had been drilled into him during those countless hours with Coach Thompson outside the community center. During the off-season, Marcus returned to Chicago with a mission. He was determined to find his mentor and properly thank him for changing his life. He visited the community center every day, asking everyone he met if they knew anything about Coach Thompson. Most people remembered seeing the old man around the basketball courts, but nobody had any real information about who he was or where he lived. Marcus hired a private investigator, thinking that would solve the mystery quickly. But even with professional help, the search proved frustrating. Coach Thompson seemed to have no official records, no address, no phone number, and no documented connection to any basketball program or organization. It was as if he had existed only in those moments when Marcus needed him most. Months passed without any leads. Marcus threw himself into his basketball career, becoming one of the league's rising stars. But he never stopped thinking about Coach Thompson or wondering what had happened to him. During interviews, Marcus would often mention his mysterious mentor, describing him as the most important influence on his career, even though he couldn't provide any concrete details about the man's identity. One evening, Marcus was watching television at home when a documentary about basketball history came on. He was only half paying attention until a familiar voice made him look up sharply. On the screen was archival footage from the 1960s, showing a young coach giving instructions to his players during a timeout. The voice was unmistakably Coach Thompson's, though the man on screen looked decades younger. Marcus grabbed the remote and turned up the volume, his heart racing as he listened to the familiar tone and cadence that had guided him through so many practice sessions. The documentary narrator explained that they were watching footage of James "Big Jim" Thompson, one of the most successful college basketball coaches in history. The man had led his team to 3 national championships and had coached numerous players who went on to have legendary professional careers. His innovative training methods and psychological approach to the game had influenced an entire generation of coaches and players. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. The young man in the grainy footage was definitely his Coach Thompson, but this couldn't be right. The documentary was talking about someone who had retired from coaching decades ago, someone who had been one of the most famous figures in basketball history. How could this legendary coach have been sitting on a bench outside a community center, helping random kids improve their games? As the documentary continued, Marcus learned more shocking details. Big Jim Thompson had indeed been a coaching legend, but he had retired suddenly at the height of his success, leaving the basketball world puzzled and disappointed. The documentary mentioned that he had become reclusive after retirement, avoiding public appearances and declining all attempts to bring him back into organized basketball. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but Marcus still couldn't believe what he was discovering. His quiet mentor, the man who had claimed no credentials or achievements, was actually one of the greatest coaches in basketball history. All those lessons about fundamentals, mental toughness, and respect for the game suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through this new lens. Armed with this new information, Marcus contacted the documentary's producer, hoping to learn more about Big Jim Thompson's current whereabouts. The producer was shocked to hear that someone had been in recent contact with the legendary coach, explaining that Thompson had been completely out of the public eye for over 20 years. The producer shared what he knew about Thompson's disappearance from basketball. After winning his third national championship, Thompson had suffered a personal tragedy that changed his perspective on life completely. His only son, who had been following in his father's footsteps as a promising young player, had been killed in a car accident. The loss devastated Thompson, causing him to question everything he had devoted his life to. Instead of continuing his successful coaching career, Thompson had walked away from everything. He turned down lucrative professional coaching offers, declined television commentary positions, and refused to write the autobiography that publishers were eager to buy. He had simply vanished, leaving behind a legacy of excellence but no forwarding address. Now Marcus understood why Coach Thompson had been so reluctant to talk about his past. The pain of losing his son had driven him away from organized basketball, but his love for the game and for helping young people had eventually drawn him back in a different way. Instead of coaching elite players in front of thousands of fans, he had chosen to work quietly with neighborhood kids who needed guidance the most. Marcus realized that he and the other kids Coach Thompson had helped were receiving something incredibly precious: the wisdom and experience of a basketball legend who was sharing his knowledge purely out of love, not for fame or money. Every technique Thompson had taught them, every piece of advice he had given, came from decades of experience at the highest levels of the sport. The private investigator finally found a lead. Through property records and cross-referencing with the documentary information, they discovered that James Thompson owned a small house about 30 miles outside of Chicago. It was registered under his legal name, which explained why earlier searches using just Coach Thompson had failed. Marcus drove to the address on a Saturday morning, his hands sweating as he approached the modest house. It was nothing like what he expected for a legendary coach's home. The house was small and simple, with an overgrown garden, and no visible signs of Thompson's basketball achievements. Marcus knocked on the door, not knowing what to expect. When the door opened, there stood Coach Thompson, looking exactly the same as he had during their community center sessions. His face showed surprise, then recognition, then a mixture of pride and sadness. He invited Marcus inside, and they sat in a living room that contained only a few framed photos of Thompson's son, but no basketball trophies or memorabilia. Thompson explained that he had been watching Marcus's professional career from afar, feeling proud but also maintaining his distance. He had intentionally disappeared from Marcus's life because he didn't want his own fame to overshadow the young man's achievements. He wanted Marcus to succeed on his own merits, not as the player coached by Big Jim Thompson. The old coach admitted that working with Marcus and the other neighborhood kids had been therapeutic for him. It reminded him why he had fallen in love with basketball in the first place: the joy of teaching, the satisfaction of watching young people grow, and the pure pleasure of the game itself. These sessions had helped him heal from the grief that had consumed him for years. Marcus spent the entire day with his mentor, finally understanding the full scope of what he had received. Not only had he been taught by one of basketball's greatest minds, but he had also been part of Thompson's journey back from devastating loss toward finding purpose again. During their emotional reunion, Coach Thompson shared stories about his legendary coaching career that brought new depth to all the lessons Marcus had learned. The fundamentals Thompson had drilled into Marcus were the same techniques he had used to develop players who became household names in basketball. The mental training exercises were refined, versions of methods that had helped teams win championships at the highest level. Thompson showed Marcus old game films featuring some of the greatest players in basketball history, pointing out techniques and strategies that Marcus recognized from their community center sessions. It was surreal to see these legends performing moves that Thompson had taught Marcus on that cracked asphalt court, using the same coaching cues and corrections. The old coach revealed that several current professional players had been among the kids he worked with during his years of informal mentoring. Marcus wasn't the only success story from Thompson's post-retirement coaching. There was a point guard playing in Europe who had been a troubled teenager when Thompson found him. There was a center in the development league who had been homeless before Thompson helped him get back on track. None of these players knew their mentor's true identity either. Thompson had helped them all under different names or simply as coach, maintaining his anonymity to protect both his privacy and their independence. He wanted each player to build their own reputation without being overshadowed by his fame. Marcus asked Thompson why he had chosen to help them specifically. The old coach explained that he had been drawn to kids who were struggling, not with their circumstances but with their belief in themselves. He saw potential in players who others overlooked, partly because he understood what it felt like to face adversity, and partly because he had learned to recognize the type of character that could overcome obstacles. Thompson admitted that he had initially approached these informal coaching sessions as a way to stay connected to basketball without the pressure and politics of organized sports, but over time he realized that this work was more fulfilling than anything he had accomplished in his official career. These kids needed what he had to offer, and helping them gave his life meaning again after his son's death. The conversation eventually turned to Marcus's current career and future goals. Thompson had been following his progress closely, noting both his successes and areas where he could still improve. Even now, years after their last formal training session, the old coach had insights that could help Marcus reach the next level of his game. They spent hours analyzing video of Marcus's recent games, with Thompson pointing out subtle adjustments that could make significant differences. It was like receiving a masterclass from one of basketball's greatest strategic minds. Marcus realized that even as a successful professional player, he was still learning from his mysterious mentor. As the day grew late, Marcus broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind throughout their reunion. He wanted the world to know about Thompson's continued contribution to basketball, about the lives he had changed, and the players he had developed through his quiet, anonymous work. He felt that Thompson's story deserved to be told, and that his methods could help countless other young players. But Thompson was hesitant about returning to the public eye. He had found peace in his anonymity, and worried that publicity would change the pure nature of his relationships with the kids he mentored. He also wasn't sure he was ready to face the basketball world's questions about his long absence and the reasons behind his retirement. Marcus understood his mentor's concerns but felt strongly that Thompson's impact needed to be recognized not for glory or fame, but because his approach to developing players was revolutionary. The combination of technical excellence, mental toughness training, and genuine care for each individual player had produced results that the basketball world needed to understand and learn from. After months of gentle persuasion from Marcus and other players Thompson had mentored, the legendary coach finally agreed to share his story publicly. However, he insisted on doing it his way, through a basketball clinic for underprivileged youth, where he could demonstrate his methods while explaining his philosophy to coaches and players who could benefit most from his knowledge. The announcement that Big Jim Thompson would emerge from retirement to conduct a public clinic sent shockwaves through the basketball world. Media outlets that hadn't mentioned his name in decades suddenly scrambled to cover the story. Current and former players who had been coached by Thompson began sharing their own tributes, describing the impact he had made on their lives and careers. Marcus was invited to be the main speaker at the clinic, sharing his story about the mysterious mentor who had transformed his life. Standing before an audience of coaches, players, and media members, Marcus described those early days when he was getting laughed at for missing shots, and how a quiet old man on a bench had changed everything. The audience was captivated as Marcus revealed that his mentor had been the legendary Big Jim Thompson all along. Many people gasped audibly when they realized that one of basketball's greatest coaches had been secretly developing players in neighborhood parks and community centers for over 2 decades. When Thompson took the court to demonstrate his teaching methods, It was like watching a master artist at work. His voice carried the same authority it had possessed during his championship seasons. But now it was tempered with a gentleness that came from years of working with kids who needed encouragement more than criticism. He worked with several young players during the clinic, making the same subtle adjustments to their form and approach that he had made with Marcus years earlier. The audience watched in amazement as players who had been struggling with their shots suddenly began making basket after basket with just minor corrections from Thompson. Between demonstrations, Thompson spoke about his philosophy of basketball and life. He explained that his greatest successes hadn't come from the championships he had won, but from the individual players he had helped discover their potential. He talked about how losing his son had initially driven him away from the game, but how working with young people had eventually brought him back to what he loved most about basketball. The clinic was filmed and later distributed to coaching programs around the world, ensuring that Thompson's methods and wisdom would reach far beyond that single day. His approach to combining technical instruction with mental training and genuine personal care became a model that other coaches began incorporating into their own programs. In the months following the clinic, Thompson gradually became more comfortable with public recognition. He began accepting invitations to speak at coaching conferences and youth programs, always focusing on how to develop not just better players, but better people. His story became an inspiration to coaches at every level, showing how true success in sports comes from the relationships built with individual players. Marcus continued to credit Thompson as the most important influence on his career, but now he could do so with full knowledge of his mentor's remarkable background. Their relationship deepened as Thompson began serving as an unofficial advisor for Marcus's foundation, which provided basketball training and mentorship to underprivileged youth. The story of the legendary coach who worked anonymously with neighborhood kids became one of basketball's most beloved tales. It reminded everyone in the sport that greatness isn't always measured in trophies and headlines, but sometimes in the quiet moments when a teacher helps a student discover what they're truly capable of achieving. Thompson never returned to official coaching, but his influence on the game continued to grow through the players he had mentored and the coaches who learned from his methods. His legacy became not just the championships he had won decades earlier, but the lives he had changed through his willingness to share his knowledge with anyone who was hungry to learn and improve.